Snow fell like judgment, slow and silent, veiling the town of red birch in a hush too heavy for such noise-laden sin. The frost curled on wagon wheels and the tips of rifles. It caked the crooked wood of the makeshift auction yard, where footprints sank into slush and men leaned on fences carved by rougher hands than theirs. In the center, half buried in shame and snow, stood the girl. She wasn't shaking from cold anymore, just stillness. The kind of stillness that came from being looked at like meat too long on the hook. Her shoes were gone. Toes red. Dress torn. Hands clasped before her like a prayer gone unanswered. Pale skin flushed at the cheeks, not from blush but from wind. Her name, someone had whispered, was Amelia May Dalton. But no one had spoken it aloud since dawn. 20 for her. She cooks. Decent hips, barked the auctioneer, a man whose mouth didn't match the rot behind his eyes. Could be good for a rancher livin' rough. A few laughs. One man muttered, "Limp's no good," as if she couldn't hear. Another called, "I'll give 10 for the hair." Amelia didn't blink. She'd learned not to. You blink, they think you're soft. You cry, and it makes them bold. The bidding dwindled like the last ember in an empty hearth. Then came a silence so unnatural it sucked breath from the snow. The crowd parted, eyes narrowing. He didn't ride in, he walked. Through snow thick enough to bury most boots. A man carved from mountain and war. Shirtless despite the cold. Chest scarred in long cruel strokes that looked earned, not inflicted. Tall enough to make the sheriff step back. Apache. With hair long as a winter shadow, bound with rawhide at the nape. He didn't look at anyone. Just walked up to the auctioneer, pulled a small leather pouch from his belt, and emptied it on the post. $5 silver. Clean. No haggling. She cooks? He asked, voice low as river stones. The auctioneer chuckled nervously. That's what they say. She limp bad? Not too bad, no sir. Just a little crooked. You know. The man turned to Amelia then. Finally. And when his dark eyes met hers, there was no hunger in them. No pity. Just question. You cook? He asked. Her voice broke like a leaf under frost. Yes. He nodded once. You come. And that was all. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They just watched. Some in disgust. Some in fear. Some with that twisted glint that comes from hating what they envy. The lawman scratched his chin, debating whether it was worth stepping in. But 5 silver was 5 silver. The girl was property, not a bride. So Amelia was lifted, awkwardly, onto the tall bay horse he led from behind the shed. She gripped the saddle horn with cracked hands. He mounted behind her, not touching, though his breath ghosted over her ear in the silence. They rode out without another word. Just the sound of hooves in snow. No one asked her if she wanted to go. But she went. Because she knew the worst thing wasn't going with a stranger. The worst thing was being left behind. They rode into a storm that didn't care about names or whispers. Snow rose like ghosts from the past, and the land turned to white ash. Trees hunched. The road narrowed. Hours passed in silence. Once, Amelia's head dipped forward, dizzy from cold. The next thing she knew, something warm and heavy wrapped around her shoulders. A buffalo hide, thick and soft. She looked back. He still didn't speak. But he hadn't let her fall. The cabin came suddenly, as if the land opened its hand to reveal a secret it didn't trust the world with. Tucked between 2 great pines, its roof was half buried, smoke curling from a stone chimney. It wasn't large. Just enough to fit a man who didn't need much in a woman who had already lost more than she dared count. He helped her down with hands firm but respectful. She expected him to guide her inside. He didn't. He opened the door, then stepped aside, waiting. Inside smelled of cedar and dry meat. There was a fire, a fur-covered cot in one corner, pots hung carefully on the wall, and a small table for 2. Everything was clean, in the way of someone who didn't tolerate mess, not because of pride, but because mess had cost him once. Amelia hovered near the fire, clutching the hide to her. He walked past, placed some wrapped venison on the table. Then pointed to the corner where the cooking tools lay. You eat. Then rest. Cook when you feel. It was more than she'd been given in months. She nodded slowly. Thank you. He gave no reply. Just took his place on the floor beside the door, sat cross-legged, and began sharpening a blade. The sound scraped against the silence, a gentle, steady rhythm. Not threatening. Just present. That night, Amelia lay curled by the fire on a bed of furs. She could hear the wind clawing outside, like a banshee mourning something it lost long ago. But the walls held. The fire burned. And across the room that man, her buyer, sat awake, carving something from wood, eyes glancing now and then toward her, as if checking that she hadn't turned to ash. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the fall. Since the blood. Since the child. But she whispered to herself, words small as prayer. Maybe he just needs a cook. Maybe that was all. When morning came, her breath fogged against the window as she peered out. The world had gone white. Endless snow. No trail back. No trail forward. She was his now. But he wasn't holding her. He was just letting her stay. Behind her, the clink of a metal pan. A cup of hot water placed on the table. Still no words. But maybe words weren't how he loved. And maybe, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to wait and see. Amelia woke to the whisper of a knife being sharpened. It was still dark outside, but the fire hadn't died. Someone had fed it while she slept. Her hands ached from the cold, but it wasn't pain that pulled her fully awake. It was the smell. Venison stew. Mild but real. A hint of salt and bay leaf in water boiled down over time. She sat up slowly, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and saw him crouched near the fire stirring. Tahoma didn't look up. Just pointed to the bowl beside her, steam curling. She reached for it, hands shaking not from cold, but from the strangeness of being served. She ate in silence. Outside, snow continued to fall in lazy, endless drifts, muffling the world. It made the cabin feel like a place separate from time. A pocket of breath in a land that no longer spoke. The man still hadn't said another word. Just gestures. Stillness. Movement with purpose. When she finished her bowl, she set it down gently, then pulled herself to her feet with a quiet groan. Her leg ached. She limped toward the woodpile near the door. I can help, she offered softly. Tahoma turned his head slightly, not in refusal, but in study. Then, without a word, he moved aside and let her pass. She bent to gather kindling. The weight of his gaze didn't press on her, it anchored her. Like she wasn't alone in the act of trying. By mid-morning, the storm had grown teeth. Wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters like a warning from the past. Amelia spent the day cleaning in soft circles, wiping, folding, tucking. She didn't ask what to do. She just read the room, the mess, the cold corners. She knew what it was to keep a place warm, without touching the fire directly. Tahoma worked beside her without speaking. He carried logs in, skinned a rabbit, mended the door latch. When he passed her, he nodded once. Not command, not approval. Just recognition. It warmed her more than the fire. In the afternoon, she burned her hand. A boiling pot slipped as she lifted it from the hearth, and hot water licked across her skin. She dropped the iron with a cry that shocked her own ears. He was there in 2 steps. No words. Just his large hand closing gently around hers, guiding it into a cool basin. The contrast of temperature bit deep, but his touch never did. Don't rush, he said, voice like gravel softened by moss. It was the first thing he'd said since buying her. She blinked at him. Not from pain, but from the sound of his voice in that quiet. She wanted to answer, but her throat didn't trust her yet. So she nodded, swallowing hard. That night, she lit a small oil lamp near the bedroll. She hadn't asked, but he hadn't stopped her either. Shadows played on the log walls, softening the sharp lines of the world. She braided her hair to calm her hands, then turned and watched him from across the room. He sat on the floor, whittling something from a piece of pine wood. His shoulders were bare again. Not for pride, she realized, but for habit. He wore strength like others wore silence, naturally, without effort. She studied the object in his hands. It looked like a doll. Rough, but taking shape. He was carving something small, round, with hands. She didn't ask who it was for. Didn't need to. When she woke again before dawn, a wool blanket had been added on top of her. She hadn't placed it there. Her burned hand had been rewrapped. Outside, wolves howled faint and distant. Inside, all was still. On the third day, she found the edge of her courage. "I'd like to wash," she said, not looking up from the fire. "Just to feel clean again." She expected silence. Or rejection. Or that flat nod he gave to things unimportant. But he stood. By evening, he had dug out a shallow bath behind the cabin where a spring trickled under ice. He laid stones around it and poured hot water over them until steam bloomed like fog. He didn't watch her undress. He didn't linger. He stood guard a good 10 paces away, arms crossed, back turned, as she bathed behind a hanging wool sheet tied between pine trunks. The hot water stung at first, then soothed. Amelia sank in until her chin touched the surface. Her scars, long hidden beneath soot and silence, floated just beneath the skin. When she emerged, teeth chattering, he handed her a deerskin towel and a robe. Still didn't look. Just waited. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too big for the moment. Inside, as she dressed, she found a folded cloth on her bedding. A dress. Simple, hand-stitched, thick for warmth. The seams were uneven, as if someone had taught himself by making mistakes. But it was hers. It fit. That evening, she wore it without shame. And when she stepped into the room he looked. Just once. Then went back to carving. He never said she was beautiful. He didn't need to. They fell into a rhythm. He hunted. She cooked. He carved. She swept. They ate together, not side by side, but close enough to share the same air. They didn't speak much. But every silence was smaller than the one before. On the 5th night, she dreamed. She was back on a staircase. Someone shouting. A man. A fist. A scream. "No, don't take the baby." She woke with a start, hands clenched, body curled into herself. A soft tap on wood. She turned her head and saw something on the stool beside her. A carved figure. A small child. Round arms. A smile. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her body had forgotten how. But she held the wooden child to her chest for a long time. Not for comfort. For memory. The next morning, a rider passed the cabin, delivering supplies. Salt, dried beans, bullets. The rider's eyes flicked to Amelia, then to Tahoma. "You bought yourself a cook or a wife?" He joked. Tahoma said nothing. Just handed over coin and closed the door. Amelia stood still a long moment after. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "Them thinking things?" He stirred the fire. "Let them think." That night, she sat beside him while he carved. Her hand brushed his once. He didn't pull away. "I never meant to stay quiet this long," she said. "But you're the first person who never asked questions I didn't want to answer." "I see enough," he replied. She looked at him then. Not his face but his hands. The way they worked gently despite their size. The care in every carved edge. The patience in every unspoken thought. She didn't know if she was healing. But she knew she was warm. Outside, the snow stopped falling. The sky turned silver. And inside, in a cabin built by calloused hands and quiet grace, 2 people shared the same fire. Neither of them said goodnight. They didn't have to. The days thawed slowly. Not the snow, it still blanketed the world in white, but the silence between them, which had started to soften like ice held too long in a warm palm. Amelia began experimenting with food. Until now, she had cooked plain and dutiful, meat roasted without seasoning, bread made more for fullness than pleasure. She hadn't dared put herself into anything. Not until that morning, when she stood barefoot on the cabin floor, fingers curled around a small jar of dried sage she'd found buried in a sack at the back of the shelf. It smelled like her mother's kitchen. Like evenings before everything fell apart. So she cooked. Not to nourish, but to say something. The stew bubbled thick with intention. Wild onions, salt, pepper, and just enough sage to make it warm in the back of the throat. She set the bowl in front of Tahoma, then sat across from him, waiting without expectation. He took one bite and paused. She watched him. He didn't speak. But he finished it slowly, every spoonful unhurried, like he was learning something from the taste. When he set the bowl down, she thought that might be the end of it. But he said, "Reminds me of before." Her heart skipped. Before what? He didn't look up. Before silence became safer than company. She wanted to ask more, but something in his posture said that was all he could give today. So she nodded, and stood to wash the bowl. The next morning, she found something folded neatly at the end of her bedroll. A shawl, soft buckskin, hand-stitched, lined with rabbit fur. The thread was clumsy in places, uneven. But it had been made for her. She wore it without words, and when he saw her, he only nodded once. That was the first language they'd ever really spoken. Later that week, as snow melted into frozen streams, and the wind found a gentler voice, she swept the cabin floor in lazy arcs. Tahoma sat nearby, repairing a cracked bowstring. The fire popped. "I used to dance," she said, unprompted. He looked up. "I was good at it. Church socials, harvest fairs. My mother said my feet were too fast for my head. Then I fell on the stairs." She smiled tightly. "No one watched me dance after that. Not even him." He didn't ask who him was. He just said, "You still dance?" "In small ways." Amelia blinked. "What do you mean?" "You cook like you remember joy. You move like it's still inside you. That's dance." She didn't know how to answer that. So she went outside to chop wood. And while the axe bit into bark, something inside her softened. When the trapper came, it was the first voice she'd heard besides Tahoma's in nearly 2 weeks. He arrived on a sway-backed horse with a burlap sack, and a grin too big for the cold. "Got your bullets, hide salt," he said, dismounting. Then, seeing Amelia near the door, "And what's this? You trade stew for skin these days." Tahoma's hand didn't move toward his knife. His eyes didn't narrow. He just stood, still as a tree, and stared the man down. It was Amelia who stepped forward. "You want bread or not?" she asked. The trapper blinked. "I bake every Thursday," she added. "If you don't want the smell on your hands, keep your mouth clean." She handed him a loaf. Not soft but warm. The man took it without another word, mounted his horse and left. That night, Amelia sat by the fire, thread in her lap, mending the hem of her dress. "He doesn't matter," Tahoma said. "I know. But I saw how your hands shook after." She dropped her gaze. "I didn't expect to feel filth again." He studied her. "You're not what he said," he replied. "And what am I?" He didn't speak. Instead he stood, walked to the shelf and brought something back. A roll of soft red fabric. He unfolded it in her lap, a dress. Handmade. Better than the last. Fitted. Stronger stitching. A pattern sewn in along the sleeves, swirling vines and small birds. "I don't know what you are yet," he said. "But I see you trying to remember." She ran her fingers over the embroidery, eyes burning. "It's beautiful." "You're becoming someone again," he said. "So I thought you should wear something that fits her." She didn't wear it that night. It felt too holy for night. But she left it folded beside her, like a promise. Later, she lay awake on her cot. Outside, wolves called to one another beneath the moon. Beside the fire, Tahoma carved. His face in shadow. His movements slow. "Do you ever think of leaving here?" she asked. "Sometimes." "To go where?" He shook his head. "It's not about where. It's about what I'd leave behind." "And what's that?" He looked up, met her eyes. "Peace." The word made her throat tighten. "I never knew peace could be found in someone else's quiet," she whispered. Neither of them said good night. The next day, Amelia walked down into town. Tahoma had gone to check traps. The wind had turned mild, and for the first time, she felt the need to move beyond the trees. To be seen, not by the men who had once bid on her, but by herself. To test whether the world still had room for her shape. She wore the red dress. She carried a basket of bread. At the church steps, she left a loaf beside the donation box. Tucked beneath it, she placed a folded note, scrawled on birch bark. From the Apache's cook. She left without waiting for stares or comments. They would whisper. She knew that. They'd say she'd gone native. That she was living in sin. That she'd chosen a wild man and called it love. But for the first time it didn't sting. That night, as snow dusted the pine branches and owls sang to the moon, she brought him a bowl of soup. He tasted it, paused, then looked at her. "This one's different," he said. "I used rosemary." He took another sip. "I like it." She smiled softly. "Then it's yours. I made it for you." Their eyes met. He set the bowl down. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he reached for her hand, not to pull her, not to claim, but to lift it to his lips. He kissed her palm. A slow, steady press. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But in the warmth between them, something unspoken sparked. Outside, snow fell again. But inside, the fire caught just a little higher. And for the first time, Amelia didn't feel like something owned. She felt like something chosen. The snow had turned slick beneath the trees, hardened by wind and footfall. Spring was still distant, but the weight of winter had shifted. Less cruel, more watchful. The quiet no longer soothed. It waited. Amelia stood barefoot on the cabin threshold, letting cold kiss her soles. In her hands, a folded shawl. Not the one he'd given her, another. One she had sewn herself, patching scraps together from torn sleeves and old linen sacks. A mark of making do, of making her own. Behind her, Tahoma crouched by the fire, whittling a sliver of pine into something smooth. He didn't look up when the knock came. It wasn't loud. Just certain. Amelia turned. Outside stood a lawman, broad-chested, thick-bearded, with eyes like polished nails. Behind him, two younger men hovered. One held a rope. The other, a rusted rifle. She stepped forward slowly. "Amelia May Dalton?" the lawman asked. She nodded, voice caught in her throat. "I'm here on behalf of your uncle," he said. "He claims you were sold under duress. Says he never gave consent. Wants you back." Tahoma rose then, tall and calm. "She's not going back," he said. The lawman's gaze flicked to him, sizing his scars, his silence. "She was bought at auction," the man said. "But the claim's being disputed. Town councils ruled she's to be returned until matters are sorted. You can make your case proper, if you want her legal." Amelia stepped forward, fire in her spine. "I was sold by the same men who broke my ribs and left me limping. They never asked what I wanted." The younger men shifted, uncertain. The lawman scratched his beard. "A woman can't just vanish into a red man's cabin and call herself free." Tahoma took a slow breath. Not anger. Just presence. His hand touched Amelia's back, not to guide her. Just to remind her he was there. "She's not vanished," he said. "She's here. Breathing. Cooking. Healing." "She's not yours," the lawman snapped. "I never said she was." The silence stretched. Then Amelia stepped forward, eyes locked on the rope in the younger man's hand. "I'm not going," she said. "You can tell them that." One of the young men looked away. The other opened his mouth, then closed it. The lawman hesitated. "This won't sit right with folks." Tahoma stepped closer. "Let them sit wrong then." No one raised a gun. They left with their pride and little else. Inside the cabin, Amelia collapsed into a chair. Not from fear, but from how much she had stood. He brought her water. She didn't drink. She just stared at her hands. "I was never supposed to be more than a name on a title," she whispered. "I thought if I cooked well enough, cleaned well enough, someone would call me useful again." He knelt before her, eyes level. "I never wanted useful," he said. "I wanted peace." She looked at him, really looked. His face, carved by sun and sorrow. His hands, stained from work, not war. His silence, once feared, now trusted. "Do you see me now?" she asked. He touched her hair, gently undoing the braid she'd worn all day. I see someone who stayed even after the door was left open. She closed her eyes, tears hot behind her lashes. That night, she cooked again. This time, bread and stew, and a small pot of wild plum jam she'd been saving for no particular day. When she laid the meal down, he reached for her wrist, not to stop her, not to claim her, but to feel her pulse. You tremble less now, he said. She nodded. I still feel watched. You are. By who? Everyone who never saw you before. They ate in silence. Afterward, she stepped outside, wrapped in her patchwork shawl. She walked past the trees, beyond the horses, to where the snow turned thin. She gathered pine branches, stripped them, then walked back with her arms full. He met her at the door. What are you making? A broom, she said. A new one. For this place. He took one of the branches from her. Then it's yours now. No, she said. It's ours. The next morning, the church in town found another bread offering, still warm, left at the doorstep. But this time, the note was signed in a woman's handwriting. From the Apache's cook. And his equal. Whispers turned to talk. Talk turned to warning. He's keeping her, someone muttered. She doesn't even ask for help. Can't trust women who stop being afraid, another said. By midday, a boy was sent to the cabin with a message. She opened it. Return by Sunday or the sheriff will come himself. Tahoma read it, then dropped it into the fire. Later, he handed her something wrapped in cloth, a piece of wood carved into a shallow bowl, its edges sanded smooth. Her name was carved faintly on the side. Not property. Not cook. Just Amelia. I've never had anything with my name on it, she said. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened a pouch from his belt, removed a piece of turquoise, and placed it into her palm. This was my mother's, he said. When she died, she said it would know where to go next. Amelia's throat tightened. She tried to give it back. I'm not sure I'm ready. He closed her fingers around it. Neither was I. But I stayed. That night, she lit 2 candles and placed them in the window. Not for help. Not for guidance. But as proof she was there, and not waiting to leave. As the wind howled through the trees, she pulled her chair beside his, sat close, and whispered something she hadn't dared say in years. Whatever happens next, I want to choose it. He looked over at her, slow and steady. Then choose. She took his hand and held it with both of hers. I'm not leaving. Outside, hoofbeats gathered in the night. But inside the cabin, 2 people sat side by side, no longer hiding. And for the first time, when someone looked at Amelia, they would not see property. They'd see someone who stayed. Snow drifted in lazy spirals outside the cabin, falling quiet as ash. Inside, Amelia stood by the hearth, her back to the door, hands buried in dough. Her sleeves were dusted in flour, her braid tucked behind one shoulder, her thoughts calm but not idle. She could feel the air shifting. Tahoma had been gone since before sunrise, checking traps by the river bend. He said he'd return before dark, but darkness had already crept in early, thick with something colder than wind. Then came the sound, distant, steady. Hoofbeats. Amelia turned, wiped her hands on her apron, and moved to the window. Out there, just beyond the edge of the tree line, 3 riders approached, slow, deliberate, lanterns swinging from their saddles like golden threats. One wore the sheriff's badge. The other 2 carried rifles. She breathed once, slow and deep, and stepped outside before they could reach the door. "Evening, Miss Dalton," the sheriff called, voice mild as poison. "Thought we'd drop by. Cold night for a woman to be this far from town." "I'm not from town anymore," she answered calm. One of the riflemen laughed. "That's not how law works, sweetheart." The sheriff dismounted, boots crunching against ice. "We've come to collect what's not rightfully his. Now you can walk back with us, or we can carry you." Amelia didn't flinch. "You think I'm his possession?" she asked. "No," the sheriff replied, eyes narrowing. "I think you've been kept. That you've been made to believe you're safer in a wild man's den than in a proper home." You mean a home where I'm struck for speaking? Where I'm told what parts of me are useful and which are shameful? No, Sheriff. I remember what that was like. Behind her, the wind rose. Trees creaked. Lantern flames sputtered. She's not going, came a voice like distant thunder. Tahoma emerged from the shadows near the barn, quiet as snowfall, tall as wrath. His coat flapped in the wind, open at the chest, steam rising off him where sweat met cold. He walked forward, barehanded, unarmed. But his eyes burned like firewood split too many times. You got no right to her, the sheriff warned. She was bought, not wed. This ain't a marriage. This is theft. Tahoma stopped in front of Amelia, placing himself between her and the rifles. I never claimed her, he said. She stayed. She can't choose. Not after what she's been through. Amelia's voice rang out, louder than any of them expected. I can. And I have. The sheriff's jaw tensed. Don't make this hard. It's already been hard, Amelia said. But I'll not be quiet anymore just to keep someone else comfortable. The younger rifleman raised his barrel, uncertain. Step aside. Tahoma's voice was low. You raise that again, you won't leave this hill with it. The man hesitated. So did his breath. Then the sheriff stepped forward. You're not the law out here. Neither are you, Tahoma replied. This land belongs to no badge. And this woman belongs to no man. He held out his hand to Amelia. She placed hers in it, steady as a vow. I'll be leaving with her, Tahoma said. Through the trees. Past the river. Where your laws don't chase, and your torches won't burn. The sheriff looked at them. Two figures standing in snow, bound not by chains but by choice, and knew he had lost something he never understood. He spat once in the snow. You'll be hunted. Then we'll run, Amelia whispered. Tahoma turned. Amelia followed. They walked through the falling dusk, footsteps soundless on frost. No shots fired. Not that night. Behind them, the men stayed behind their lanterns, unwilling to enter a darkness that didn't fear them. At the river's edge, Tahoma stopped. The current whispered like an old lullaby, water pushing past stones as if fleeing something it couldn't name. He turned to her. We can go farther, he said. Keep going until there's no more town to chase us. She looked up at him. Or we can stay. Right here. Make the kind of home they can't touch. He hesitated. Not from doubt, but awe. I bought you, he said. To cook. To survive the cold. I thought I needed hands, not a heart. Amelia reached up, touching the edge of his jaw. And I thought I was too ruined to be seen, she said. But you didn't look away. They built a shelter beside the river that spring, long before the town dared send anyone else. Word spread, eventually, that the woman who'd been bought became a bride not with a vow, but with a choice. And the Apache, once feared, was the one man she never feared. They were whispered about, judged, forgotten. But they were never broken. Years later, a young boy from the valley wandered too far north and found an old cabin beside a fast river. He swore he saw smoke rising and heard a woman's laugh drift through the pines. No one believed him. But in that hidden place where footprints faded fast and names no longer mattered, a red dress still hung by the door. And beside the hearth, two pairs of boots rested side by side. Sometimes, home isn't the place you come from. It's the one you choose with someone who sees you whole. And if this story of quiet courage and fire beneath silence stirred something in you, click the next tale on your screen. It's even warmer than this one. Go on now. I'll be right here like always, waiting with another story worth staying for.